Chapter 5 of Studies in the Psychology of Sex, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kirk Ziegler. Studies in the Psychology of Sex, Volume 2 by Havelock ELLIS. Chapter 5. The Nature of Sexual Inversion, Part 1. Before stating briefly my own conclusions as to the nature of sexual inversion, I propose to analyze the facts brought out in the histories which I have been able to study. Race. All my cases, 80 in number, are British and American, 20 living in the United States and the rest being British. Ancestry, from the point of view of race, was not made a matter of special investigation. It appears, however, that at least 44 are English or mainly English. At least 10 are Scotch or of Scotch extraction. 2 are Irish and 4 others largely Irish. 4 have German fathers or mothers. Another is of German descent on both sides, while 2 others are of remote German extraction. 2 are partly and 1 entirely French. 2 have a Portuguese strain, and at least 2 are more or less Jewish. Except the apparently frequent presence of the German element, there is nothing remarkable in this ancestry. Heredity. It is always difficult to deal securely with the significance of heredity, or even to establish a definite basis of facts. I have by no means escaped this difficulty, for in some cases I have not even had an opportunity of cross-examining the subjects whose histories I have obtained. Still, the facts, so far as they emerge, have some interest. I possess some record of heredity in 62 of my cases. Of these, not less than 24, or in the proportion of nearly 39%, assert that they have reason to believe that other cases of inversion have occurred in their families, and while in some it is only a strong suspicion, in others there is no doubt whatever. In one case there is reason to suspect inversion on both sides. Usually the inverted relatives have been brothers, sisters, cousins, or uncles. In one case a bisexual son seems to have had a bisexual father. This hereditary character of inversion, which was denied by Näcke, is a fact of great significance, and as it occurs in cases which I am well acquainted, I can have no doubt concerning the existence of the tendency. The influence of suggestion may often be entirely excluded, especially when the persons are of different sex. Both Krafft-Ebing and Moll noted a similar tendency. Von Römer states that in 1/3 of his cases there was inversion in other members of the family. Hirschfeld also found that there is a relatively high proportion of cases of family inversion. 26, so far as can be ascertained, belong to reasonably healthy families. Minute investigation would probably reduce the number of these, and it is noteworthy that even in some of the healthy families there was only 1 child born of the parents' marriage. In 28 cases there is more or less frequency of morbidity or abnormality, eccentricity, alcoholism, neurasthenia, insanity, or nervous disease, on one or both sides, in addition to inversion or apart from it. In some of these cases the inverted offspring is the outcome of the union of a very healthy with a thoroughly morbid stock. In some others there is a minor degree of abnormality on both sides. General health. It is possible to speak with more certainty of the health of the individual than that of his family. Of the 80 cases, 53, or about 2/3, may be said to enjoy good and sometimes even very good health, though occasionally there is some slight qualification to be made. In 22 cases the health is delicate, or at best only fair. In these cases there is sometimes a tendency to consumption, and often marked neurasthenia, and a more or less unbalanced temperament. 4 cases are morbid to a considerable degree. The remaining case had had insane delusions which required treatment in an asylum. A considerable proportion, included among those as having either good or fair health, may be described as of extremely nervous temperament, and in most cases they so described themselves. a certain proportion of these combine great physical and especially mental energy with this nervousness. All these are doubtless of neurotic temperament. Very few can said to be conspicuously lacking in energy. On the whole, therefore, a large proportion of these inverted individuals are passing through life in an unimpaired state of health, which enables them to do at least their fair share of work in the world. In a considerable proportion of my cases that work is of highly intellectual value. Only in 5 cases, it will be seen, or at most 6, can the general health be said to be distinctly bad. This result may, perhaps, seem surprising. It must, however, be remembered that my cases do not, on the whole, represent the class which alone the physician is usually able to bring forward. For example, the sexual inverts who are suffering from a more or less severe degree of complete nervous breakdown. There is no frequent relationship between homosexuality and insanity, and such homosexuality as is found in asylums is mostly of a spurious character. This point was especially emphasized by Näcke, Homosexualität und Psychose, Zeitschrift für Psychiatrie, Volume 68, No. 3, 1911. He quoted the opinions of various distinguished alienists as to the rarity with which they had met genuine inverts, and recorded his own experiences. He had never met a genuine invert in the asylum throughout his extensive experience, although he was quite willing to admit that there may be unrecognized inverts in asylums, and one patient informed him after leaving that he was inverted, and had attracted the attention of the police both before and afterward, though nothing happened in the asylum. Among 1,500 patients in the asylum during 1 year, active pedicatio occurred in about 1% of cases, these patients being frequently idiots or imbeciles, and at the same time masturbators, solitary or mutual. Hirschfeld informed Näcke that among homosexual persons hysterical conditions, not usually on hereditary basis, are fairly common, and neurasthenia of high degree decidedly frequent, but though stages of depression are common he had never seen pure melancholia and very seldom mania, but paranoid delusional ideas frequently, and he agreed with Byron of Broadmoor that religious delusions are not uncommon. General paralysis occurs, but it is comparatively rare, and the same may be said of dementia praecox. On the whole, although Hirschfeld was unable to give precise figures, there was no reason whatever to suppose an abnormal prevalence of insanity. This was Näcke's own view. It is quite true, Näcke concluded, that homosexual actions occur in every form of psychosis, especially in congenital and secondary demence, and at periods of excitement. But we are here more concerned with pseudo-homosexuality than with true inversion. Hirschfeld finds that 75% inverts are of sound heredity. This seems too large a proportion. In any case allowance must be made for differences in method and minuteness of investigation. I am fairly certain that thorough investigation would very considerably enlarge the proportion of cases with morbid heredity. At the same time this enlargement would be chiefly obtained by bringing minor abnormalities to the front, and it would then have to be shown how far the families of average or normal persons are free from such abnormalities. The question is sometimes asked, what family tree is free from neuropathic taint? At present it is difficult to answer this question precisely. There is good ground to believe that a fairly large portion of families are free from such taint. In any case, it seems probable that the families to which the inverted belong do not usually present such profound signs of nervous degeneration as we were formerly led to suppose. What we vaguely call eccentricity is common among them. Insanity is much rarer. First appearance of homosexual instinct. Out of 72 cases, in 8 the instinct veered round to the same sex in adult age, or at all events after puberty. In 3 of these there had been a love disappointment with a woman. No other cause than this can be assigned for the transition, but it is noteworthy that in at least 2 of these cases the sexual instinct is undeveloped or morbidly weak, while a third individual is of somewhat weak physique, and another has long been in delicate health. In a further case, also somewhat morbid, the development was rather more complicated. In 64 cases, or in a proportion of 88%, the abnormal instinct began early in life, without previous attraction to the opposite sex. In 27 of these it dates from about puberty, usually beginning at school. In 39 cases the tendency began before puberty, between the ages of 5 and 11, usually between 7 and 9, sometimes as early as the subject can remember. It must not be supposed that, in these numerous cases of the early appearance of homosexuality, the manifestations were of a specifically physical character, although erections were noted in a few cases. For the most part, sexual manifestation at this early age, whether homosexual or heterosexual, are purely psychic. Sexual precocity and hyperesthesia. It is a fact of considerable interest and significance that in so large a number of my cases there was distinct precocity of the sexual emotions, both on the physical and psychic sides. There can be little doubt that, as many previous observers have found, inversion tends strongly to be associated with sexual precocity. I think it may be further said that sexual precocity tends to encourage the inverted habit where it exists. Why this should be so is obvious. If we believe, as there is some reason for believing, that at an early age the sexual instinct is comparatively undifferentiated in its manifestations, the precocious accentuation of the sexual impulse leads to definite crystallization of the emotions at a premature stage. It must be added that precocious sexual energy is likely to remain feeble, and that a feeble sexual energy adapts itself more easily to homosexual relationships, in which there is no definite act to be accomplished, than to normal relationships. It is difficult to say how many of my cases exhibit sexual weakness. In 6 or 7 it is evident, and it may be suspected in many others, especially in those who are and often describe themselves as sensitive or nervous, as well as in those whose sexual development was very late. In many cases there is marked hyperesthesia or irritable weakness. Hyperesthesia simulates strength, and while there can be little doubt that some sexual inverts, and more especially bisexuals, do not possess unusual sexual energy, in others it is but apparent. The frequent repetition of seminal emissions, for example, may be the result of weakness as well as of strength. It must be added that this irritability of the sexual center is, in a considerable proportion of inverts, associated with marked emotional tendencies to affection and self-sacrifice. In the extravagance of his affection and devotion, it is frequently observed, the male invert resembles any normal woman. Suggestion and other exciting causes of inversion. In 18 of my cases it is possible that some event or special environment in early life had more or less influence in turning the sexual instinct into homosexual channels, or in calling out a latent inversion. In 3 cases a disappointment in normal love seems to have produced a profound nervous and emotional shock, acting, as we seem bound to admit, on a predisposed organism, and developing a fairly permanent tendency to inversion. In 8 cases there was seduction by an older person, but in at least 4 or 5 of these there was already a well-marked predisposition. In at least 8 other cases, example, usually at school, may probably be regarded as having exerted some influence. It is noteworthy that in very few of my cases can we trace the influence of any definite suggestion, as asserted by Schrick-Notzing, who believes that, in the causation of sexual inversion, as undoubtedly in the causation of erotic fetichism, we must give the first place to accidental factors of education and external influence. He records the case of a little boy who innocently gazed in curiosity at the penis of his father who was urinating, and had his ears boxed, whence arose a train of thought and feeling which resulted in complete sexual inversion. In 2 of the cases I have reported we have parallel incidents, and here we see clearly that the homosexual tendency already existed. I do not question the occurrence of such incidents, but I refuse to accept them as supplying the causation of inversion, and in doing so I am supported by all the evidence I am able to obtain. I am in agreement with a correspondent who wrote, "Considering that all the boys are exposed to the same order of suggestion, sight of a man's naked organs, sleeping with a man, being handled by a man, and that only a few of them become sexually perverted, I think it reasonable to conclude that those few were previously constituted to receive the suggestion. In fact, suggestion seems to play exactly the same part in the normal and abnormal awakening of sex. I would go so far as to assert that for normal boys and girls the developed sexual organs of the adult man or woman, from their size, hairiness, and the mystery which envelopes them, nearly always exert a certain fascination, whether of attraction or horror. But this has no connection with homosexuality, and scarcely with sexuality at all. Thus in one case known to me, a boy of 6 or 7 took pleasure in caressing the organs of another boy, twice his own age, who remained passive and indifferent. Yet this child grew up without ever manifesting any homosexual instinct. The seed of suggestion can only develop when it falls on suitable soil. If it is to act on a fairly normal nature, the perverted suggestion must be very powerful or iterated, and even then its influence will probably only be temporary, disappearing in the presence of the normal stimulus. Not only is suggestion unnecessary to develop a sexual impulse already rooted in the organism, but when exerted in an opposite direction, it is powerless to divert that impulse. We see this illustrated in several of the cases whose history I have presented. Thus in one case a boy was seduced by the housemaid at the age of 14, and even derived pleasure from the girl. Yet none the less the native homosexual instinct asserted itself a year later. In another case heterosexual suggestions were offered and accepted in early life, yet notwithstanding, the homosexual attraction was slowly evolved from within. I have therefore but little to say of the influence of suggestion, which was formerly exalted to a position of the first importance in books on sexual inversion. This is not because I underestimate the great part played by suggestion in many fields of normal and abnormal life. It is because I have been able to find but few decided traces of it in sexual inversion. In many cases, doubtless there may be some slight elements of suggestion in developing the inversion, though they cannot be traced. Their importance seems usually questionable even when they are discovered. Take Schreck-Notzing's case of the little boy whose ears were boxed for what his father considered improper curiosity. I find it difficult to realize that a mighty suggestion can thereby be generated unless a strong emotion exists for it to unite with. In that case the seed falls on prepared soil. Is the wide prevalence of normal sexuality due to the fact that so many little boys have had their ears boxed for taking naughty liberties with women? If so, I am quite prepared to accept Schrenck-Notzing's explanation as a complete account of the matter. I know of one case indeed in which an element of what may fairly be called suggestion can be detected. It is that of a physician who had always been on very friendly terms with men, but had sexual relations exclusively with women, finding fair satisfaction, until the confessions of an inverted patient one day came to him as a revelation. Thereafter he adopted inverted practices and ceased to find any attraction in women. But even in this case, as I understand the matter, suggestion merely served to reveal his own nature to the man. For a physician to adopt the perverted habits which the visit of a chance patient suggests to him can scarcely be a phenomenon of pure suggestion. We have no reason to suppose that this physician practiced every perversion he heard of from patients. He adopted that which fitted his own nature. In another case homosexual advances were made to a youth and accepted, but he had already been attracted to men in childhood. Again, in another case, there were homosexual influences in the boyhood of a subject who became bisexual, but as the subject's father was of similar bisexual temperament, we can attach no potency to the mere suggestions. In another case we find homosexual influence in childhood, but the child was already delicate, shy, nervous, and feminine, clearly possessing a temperament predestined to develop in a homosexual direction. The irresistible potency of the inner impulse is well illustrated in a case presented by Hirschfeld and Burchard. "My daughter Emma," said the subject's mother, "showed boyish inclinations at the age of 3, and they increased from year to year. She never played with dolls, only with tin soldiers and guns and castles. She would climb trees and jump ditches. She made friends with the drivers of all the carts that came to our house, and they would place her on the horse's back. The annual circus was a joy to her for all the year. Even as a child of 4, she was so fearless on horseback that lookers on shouted 'Bravo!' and all declared she was a born horsewoman. It was her greatest wish to be a boy. She would wear her elder brother's clothes all day, notwithstanding her grandmother's indignation. Cycling, gymnastics, boating, swimming were her passion, and she showed skill in them. As she grew older she hated prettily adorned hats and clothes. I had much trouble with her, for she would not wear pretty things. The older she grew, the more her masculine and decided ways developed. This excited much outcry and offense. People found my daughter unfeminine and disagreeable, but all my trouble and exhortations availed nothing to change her." Now this young woman, whom all the influences of a normal feminine environment failed to render feminine, was not physiologically a woman at all. The case proved to be the unique instance of an individual possessing all the external characteristics of a woman, combined with the internal testicular tissue capable of emitting true masculine semen through the feminine urethra. No suggestions of the environment could suffice to overcome this fundamental fact of internal constitution. Hirschfeld and Burchard, Spermaskretion aus einer weiblichen Harnröhre, Deutsche Medizinische Wochenschrift, No. 52, 1911. I may here quote 3 American cases not previously published, for which I am indebted to Professor Frank Lydston of Chicago. They seem to me to illustrate the only kind of suggestions which play much part in the evolution of inversion. I give them in Dr. Lydston's words. Case 1. A man, 45 years of age, attracted by the allusion to my essay on social perversion contained in the English translation of Krafft Ebing's Psychopathia Sexualis, consulted me regarding the possible cure of his condition. This individual was a finely educated, very intelligent man, who was an excellent linguist. He had considerable music ability, and was in the employ of a firm whose business was such as to demand on part of its employees considerable legal acumen, clerical ability, and knowledge of real estate transactions. This man stated that at the age of puberty, without any knowledge of perversity of sexual feeling, he was thrown intimately in contact with males of more advanced years, who took various means to excite his sexual passions, the result being that perverted sexual practices were developed, which were continued for a number of years. He thereafter noticed an aversion to women. At the solicitations of his family he finally married, without any very intelligent idea as to what, if anything, might be expected of him in the marital relation. Absolute impotence, indeed repugnance for association with his wife, was the lamentable sequence. A divorce was in contemplation when, fortunately for all parties concerned, the wife suddenly died. Being a man of more than ordinary intelligence, this individual, prior to seeking my aid, had sought vainly for some remedy for his unfortunate condition. He stated that he believed there was an element of heredity in his case, his father having been a dipsomaniac and one brother having died insane. He nevertheless stated it to be his opinion that notwithstanding the hereditary taint, he would have been perfectly normal from a sexual standpoint had it not been for acquired impressions at or about the period of puberty. This man presented a typical neurotic type of physique, complained of being intensely nervous, was prematurely gray, of only fair stature, and had an uncontrollable nystagmus, which he said had existed for some 15 years. As might be expected, treatment in this case was of no avail. I began the use of hypnotic suggestion at the hands of an expert professional hypnotist. The patient, being called out of the state, finally gave up treatment, and I have no means of knowing what his present condition is. Case 2. A lady patient of mine who happened to be an actress, and consequently a woman of the world, brought to me for an opinion some correspondence which had passed between her younger brother and a man living in another state, with whom he was on quite intimate terms. In one of these letters various flying trips to Chicago for the purpose of meeting the lad, who by the way was only 17 years of age, were alluded to. It transpired also, as evidenced by the letters, that on several occasions the young lad had been taken on trips in Pullman cars by his friend, who was a prominent railroad official. The character of the correspondence was such as the average healthy man would address to a woman with whom he was enamored. It seemed that the author of the correspondence had applied to this boy affinity the name Cinderella, and the protestations of passionate affection that were made towards Cinderella certainly would have satisfied the most exacting woman. The young lad subsequently made a confession to me, and I put myself in correspondence with his male friend, with the result that he called upon me and I obtained a full history of the case. The method of indulgence in this case was the usual one of oral masturbation, in which the lad was the passive party. I was unable to obtain any definite data regarding the family history of the elder individual in this case, but understand that there was a taint of insanity in his family. He himself was a robust, fine-looking man, above middle age, who was well educated and very intelligent, as he necessarily must have been, because of the prominent position he held with an important railway company. I will state, as a matter of interest, that the lad in this case, who is now 23 years of age, has recently consulted me for impotentia cauendi, manifesting a frigidity for women, and from the young man's statements I am convinced that he is well on the road to confirmed sexual perversion. An interesting point in this connection is that the young man's sister, the actress already alluded to, has recently had an attack of acute mania. I have other unpublished cases that might be of interest, but these two are somewhat classical, and typify to a greater or less degree the majority of other cases. I will, however, mention one other case occurring in a woman. Case 3. A married woman 40 years of age. She has been deserted by her husband because of her perverted sexuality. Neurotic history on both sides of the family, and several cases of insanity on the mother's side. In this case, affinity for the same sex and perverted desire for the opposite sex existed, a combination by no means infrequent. Hypnotic suggestion tried, but without success. Cause was evidently suggestion and example on the part of another female pervert with whom she associated before her marriage. Marriage was late, at the age of 35. In all these cases there was an element of what may be called suggestion, but it was really much more than this. It was probably in each case active seduction by an elder person of a predisposed younger person. It will be observed that in each case there was, at the least, an organic neurotic basis for suggestion and seduction to work on. I cannot regard these cases as entitled to modify our attitude towards suggestion. End of Chapter 5, Part 1. Chapter 5 of Studies in the Psychology of Sex, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Studies in the Psychology of Sex, Volume 2, by Havelock, ELLIS. Chapter 5. The Nature of Sexual Inversion, Part 2. Masturbation. Moreau believed that masturbation was a cause of sexual inversion, and Krafft-Ebing looked upon it as leading to all sorts of sexual perversions. The same opinion was currently repeated by many writers. It is not now accepted. Moll emphatically rejected the idea that masturbation can be the cause of inversion. Nike repeatedly denies that masturbation, any more than seduction, can ever produce true inversion. Hirschfeld attaches to it no etiological significance. Many years ago I gave special attention to this point and reached a similar conclusion, that masturbation, especially at an early age, may sometimes enfeeble the sexual activities, and aid the manifestations of inversion, I certainly believe. Beyond this, there is little in the history of my male cases to indicate masturbation as a cause of inversion. It is true that 44 out of 51 admit that they have practiced masturbation, at all events, occasionally, or at some period in their lives, and it is possible that this proportion is larger than that found among normal people. Even if so, however, it is not difficult to account for, bearing in mind that the fact that the homosexual person has not the same opportunities as has the heterosexual person to gratify his instincts, and that masturbation may sometimes legitimately appear to him as the lesser of two evils. Not only has masturbation been practiced at no period in at least 7 of the cases, for concerning several I have no information, but in several others it was never practiced until long after the homosexual instinct had appeared. In one case not till the age of 40, and then only occasionally. In at least 8 it was only practiced at puberty. In at least 8, however, it began before the age of puberty. At least 9 left off about the age of 20. Unfortunately, as yet, we have little definite evidence as to the prevalence and extent of masturbation among normal individuals. Among the women masturbation is found in at least 5 cases out of 7. In one case there was no masturbation until comparatively late in life, and then only at rare intervals and under exceptional circumstances. In another case, some years after the homosexual attraction had been experienced, it was practiced, though not in excess, from the age of puberty for about 4 years, and then abandoned. During these years the physical sexual feelings were more imperative than they were afterward felt to be. In 2 cases masturbation was learned spontaneously soon after puberty, and in one of these practiced in excess before the manifestations of inversion became definite. In all cases the subjects are emphatic in asserting that this practice neither led to, nor was caused by, the homosexual attraction, which they regard as a much higher feeling, and it must be added that the occasional practice of masturbation is very far from rare among fairly normal women. While this is so, I am certainly inclined to believe that an early and excessive indulgence in masturbation, though not an adequate cause, is a favoring condition for the development of inversion, and that this is especially so in women. The sexual precocity indicated by early and excessive masturbation doubtless sometimes reveals an organism already predisposed to homosexuality. But, apart from this, when masturbation arises spontaneously at an early age on a purely physical basis, it seems to tend to produce a divorce between the physical and the psychic aspects of sexual love. The sexual manifestations are all diverted into this physical direction, and the child is ignorant that such phenomena are normally allied to love. Then, when a more spiritual attraction appears with adolescent development, this divorce is perpetuated. Instead of the physical and psychic feelings appearing together when the ego for sexual attraction comes, the physical feelings are prematurely twisted from their natural end, and it becomes abnormally easy for a person of the same sex to step in and take the place rightfully belonging to a person of the opposite sex. This has certainly seemed to me the course of events in some cases I have observed. Attitude toward the opposite sex. In 17 cases, of whom 5 are married and others proposing to marry, there is a sexual attraction to both sexes, a condition formerly called psychosexual hermaphroditism, but now more usually bisexuality. In such cases, although there is pleasure and satisfaction in relationship with both sexes, there is usually a greater degree of satisfaction in connection with one sex. Most of the bisexual prefer their own sex. It is curiously rare to find a person, whether man or woman, who by choice exercises relationships with both sexes and prefers the opposite sex. This would seem to indicate that the bisexual may really be inverts. In any case, bisexuality emerges imperceptibly into simple inversion. In at least 16 of 52 cases of simple inversion in men there has been connection with women, in some instances only once or twice, in others during several years, but it was always with an effort, or from a sense of duty and anxiety to be normal. They never experienced any real pleasure in the act, or sense of satisfaction after it. 4 of these cases are married, but marital relationships usually cease after a few years. At least 4 others were attracted to women when younger, but are not now. Another once felt sexually attracted to a boyish woman, but never made any attempt to obtain any relationships with her. 3 or 4 others, again, have tried to have connection with women, but failed. The largest portion of my cases have never had any sexual intimacy with the opposite sex, and some of these experience what, in the case of the male invert, is sometimes called horror femina. But while woman as an object of sexual desire is in such cases disgusting to them, and it is usually difficult for a genuine invert to have connection with a woman except by setting up images of his own sex, for the most part inverts are capable of genuine friendships, irrespective of sex. It is perhaps not difficult to account for the horror, much stronger than normally felt toward a person of the same sex, with which the invert often regards the sexual organs of persons of the opposite sex. It cannot be said that the sexual organs of either sex under the influence of sexual excitement are aesthetically pleasing. They only become emotionally desirable through the parallel excitement of the beholder. When the absence of parallel excitement is accompanied in the beholder by the sense of unfamiliarity, as in childhood, or by an erotic hypersensitiveness, the conditions are present for the production of intense horror femina, or horror masculis, as the case may be. It is possible that, as Otto Rank argues in his interesting study, Die Nachtheit im Sage und Dichtung, this horror of the sexual organs of the opposite sex, to some extent felt even by normal people, is embodied in the Melusine type of legend. Erotic dreams. Our dreams follow, as a general rule, the impulses that stir our waking psychic life. The normal man or woman in sexual vigor dreams of loving a person of the opposite sex. The inverted man dreams of loving a man, the inverted woman of loving a woman. Dreams thus have a certain value in diagnosis, more especially since there is less unwillingness to confess to a perverted dream than to a perverted action. Ulrichs first referred to the significance of the dreams of inverts. At a later period, Moll pointed out that they have some value in diagnosis when we are not sure how far the inverted tendency is radical. Then Näcke repeatedly emphasized the importance of dreams as constituting, he believed, the most delicate test we possess in the diagnosis of homosexuality. This was an exaggerated view which failed to take into account the various influences which may deflect dreams. Hirschfeld has made the most extensive investigation on this point, and found that among 100 inverts 87 had exclusively homosexual dreams, while most of the rest had no dreams at all. Among my cases, only 4 definitely state that there are no erotic dreams, while 31 acknowledge that the dreams are concerned more or less with persons of the same sex. Of these, at least 16 assert or imply that their dreams are exclusively of the same sex. 2, though apparently inverted congenitally, have had erotic dreams of women, in one case more frequently than of men. These 2 exceptions have no apparent explanation. Another appears to have sexual dreams of a nightmare character, in which women appear. In another case there were always at first dreams of women, but this subject had sometimes had connection with prostitutes, and is not absolutely indifferent to women, while another, whose dreams remain heterosexual, had in early life some attraction to girls. In the cases of distinct bisexuality there is no unanimity. 2 dream of their own sex, 2 dream of both sexes. 1 usually dreams of the opposite sex, and 1 man, while dreaming of both, dislikes those dreams in which women figure. In at least 3 cases, dreams of sexual character begin at the age of 8 or earlier. The phenomena presented by erotic dreams, alike in normal and abnormal persons, are somewhat complex. The dreams are by no means a sure guide to the dreamer's real sexual attitude. The fluctuation of dream imagery may be illustrated by the experiences of one of my subjects, who thus indirectly summarizes his own experiences. When he was quite a child, he used to be haunted by gross and grotesque dreams of naked adult men, which must have been erotic. At the age of puberty he dreamed in 2 ways, but always about males. One species of vision was highly idealistic. A radiant and lovely young man's face with floating hair appeared to him on a background of dim shadows. The other was obscene, being generally the sight of a groomer's or carter's genitals in a state of violent erection. He never dreamed erotically or sentimentally about women, but when the dream was frightful, the terror-making personage was invariably female. In ordinary dreams, women of his family or acquaintance played a trivial part. At the age of 24, having determined to conquer his homosexual passions, he married, found no difficulty in cohabitating with his wife, and begat several children, although he took little passionate delight in the sexual act. He still continued to dream exclusively of men for several years, and the obscene visions became more frequent than the idealistic. Gradually, coarse and uninteresting erotic dreams of women began to haunt his mind in sleep. A curious particular regarding the new type of vision was that he never dreamed of whole females, only of their sexual parts, seen in a blur, and the seminal emissions which attended the mental pictures left a feeling of fatigue and disgust. In course of time his wife and he agreed to live separately so far as sexual relations are concerned. He then indulged his passion for males, and wholly lost those rudimentary female dreams which had been developed during the period of nuptial cohabitation. Not only is it possible for the genuine invert to be trained into heterosexual erotic dreams, but homosexual dreams may occasionally be experienced by persons who are, and always have been, exclusively heterosexual. I could bring forward much evidence on this point. Autoerotism in Volume 1 of these studies. Both men and women who have always been of pronounced heterosexual tendency without a trace of inversion are liable to rare homosexual dreams, not necessarily involving orgasm or even definite sexual excitement, and sometimes accompanied by a feeling of repugnance. As an example, I may present a dream, which had no known origin, of an exclusively heterosexual lady aged 42. She dreamed she was in bed with another woman, unknown to her, and lying on her own stomach, while with her right hand stretched out she was feeling the other's sexual parts. She could distinctly perceive the clitoris, vagina, etc. She felt a sort of disgust with herself for what she was doing, but continued until she awoke. She then found herself lying on her stomach as in the dream, and at first thought she must have been touching herself, but realized that this could not have been the case. Niceforo, who believes that inversion may develop out of masturbation, considers that the dreams of masturbation by association of ideas may take on an inverted character. Lipsicopée Siswala, 1897, page 3569. This, however, must be rare and will not account for most of the dreams in question. Neke and Colin Scott, some years ago, independently referred to cases in which normal persons were liable to homosexual dreams, and Ferrer, Revue de Médecine, December 1898, referred to a man who had a horror of women, but appeared only to manifest homosexuality in his dreams. Archiv für Kriminalanthropologie, 1907, Heft 1 and 2. Calls dreams which represent a reaction of opposition to the dreamer's ordinary life contrast dreams. Hirschfeld, who accepts Neke's contrast dreams in relation to homosexuality, considers that they indicate a latent bisexuality. We may admit this is so, in the same sense in which a complementary color image called up by another color indicates the possibility of perceiving that color. In most cases, however, it seems to me that homosexual dreams in normal persons may be simply explained as due to the ordinary confusion and transition of dream imagery. See Ellis, The World of Dreams, especially Chapter 2. Methods of sexual relationship. The exact mode in which an inverted instinct finds satisfaction is frequently of importance from the medico-legal standpoint. From a psychological standpoint it is of minor significance, being chiefly of interest as showing the degree to which the individual has departed from the instinctive feelings of his normal fellow beings. Taking 57 inverted men of whom I have definite knowledge, I find that 12, restrained by moral or other considerations, have never had any physical relationship with their own sex. In some 22 cases the sexual relationship rarely goes beyond close physical contact and fondling, or at most mutual masturbation and intercrural intercourse. In 10 or 11 cases of fellatio, oral excitation, frequently in addition to some form of mutual masturbation, and usually, though not always, as the active agency is the form preferred. In 14 cases, actual pedicatio, usually active, not passive, has been exercised. In these cases, however, pedicatio is by no means always the habitual or even the preferred method of gratification. It seems to be the preferred method in about 7 cases. Several who have never experienced it, including some who have never practiced any form of physical relationship, state that they feel no objection to pedicatio. Some have this feeling in regard to active, others in regard to passive pedicatio. The proportion of inverts who practice or have at some time experienced pedicatio, thus revealed nearly 25%, is large. In Germany, Hirschfeld finds it to be only 8%, and Merzbach only 6%. I believe, however, that a wider induction from a larger number of English or American cases would yield a proportion much nearer to that found in Germany. Pseudo-sexual attraction. It is sometimes supposed that in homosexual relationships one person is always active, physically and emotionally, the other passive. Between men, at all events, this is very frequently not the case, and the invert cannot tell if he feels like a man or like a woman. Thus one writes, "In bed with my friend I feel as if he feels, and he feels as I feel. The result is masturbation, and nothing more or desire for more on my part. I get it over too as soon as possible, in order to come to the best, sleeping arms around each other, or talking so." It remains true, however, that there may usually be traced what it is possible to call pseudo-sexual attraction, by which I mean a tendency for the invert to be attracted toward persons unlike himself, so that in his sexual relationships there is a certain semblance of sexual opposition. Numa Praetorius considers that in homosexuality the attraction of opposites, the attraction for soldiers and other primitive vigorous types, plays a greater part than among normal lovers. This pseudo-sexual attraction is, however, as Hirschfeld points out, and as we see by the histories here presented, by no means invariable. M.N. writes, "To me it appears that the female element must, of necessity, exist in the body that desires the male, and that nature keeps her law in the spirit, though she breaks it in the form. The rest is all a matter of individual temperament and environment. The female nature of the invert, hampered though it is by its disguise of flesh, is still able to exert an extraordinary influence, and calls incessantly upon the male. This influence seems called into action most violently in the presence of males possessed of strong sexual magnetism of their own. Such men are generally more or less conscious of the influence, and the result is either a vague appreciation which will make the male wonder why he gets on so well with the invert, or else the influence will be realized to be something incongruous and unnatural, and will be resented accordingly. Sometimes, indeed, the reciprocated feeling, circumstance and opportunity permitting, will prove strong enough to induce sexual relations. Reason will then generally overpower instinct, and the feeling, aroused unaware, will probably be changed into repulsion. Further, the influence reacts in the same way on women, who, particularly if they are strongly sexual, experience involuntary sensations of dislike or antagonism on association with inverts. There is, however, one terrible reality for the invert to face, no matter how much he may wish to avoid it and seek to deceive himself. There exists for him an almost absolute lack of any genuine satisfaction either in the way of affections or desires. His whole life is passed in vainly seeking and desiring the male, the antithesis of his nature, and in consorting with inverts he must perforce be content with the male in form only, the shadow without the substance. Indeed, one invert necessarily regards another as being of the same undesired female sex as himself, and for this reason it will be found that while friendships between inverts frequently exist, and these are characteristically feminine, unstable, and liable to betrayal, love attachments are less common, and when they occur must naturally be based upon considerable self-deception. Venal gratifications are always, of course, as possible as they are unsatisfactory, and here perhaps some of the peculiarities of taste accompanying inversion may admit of elucidation. In considering the peculiar predilection shown by inverts for youths of inferior social position, for the wearers of uniforms, and for extreme physical development and virility not necessarily accompanied by intellectuality, regard must be had to the probable conduct of women placed in a position of complete irresponsibility, combined with absolute freedom of action and every opportunity for promiscuity. It seems to me that the importance of recognizing the underlying female element in inversion cannot be too strongly insisted upon. The majority of inverts, writes Z., differ in no detail of their outward appearance, their physique, or their dress from normal men. They are athletic, masculine in habit, frank in manner, passing through society year after year without arousing a suspicion of their inner temperament. Were it not so, society would long ago have had its eyes opened to the amount of perverted sexuality it harbors. These lines were written, not in opposition to the more subtle distinctions pointed out above, but in refutation of the vulgar error which confuses the typical invert with the painted and petticoated features who appear in police courts from time to time, and whose portraits are presented by Lombroso, Legludic, etc. On another occasion the same writer remarked, while expressing general agreement with the idea of a pseudo-sexual attraction, "The liaison is by no means always sought and begun by the person who is abnormally constituted. I mean that I can cite cases of decided males who have made up to inverts, and have found their happiness in the reciprocated passion. One pronounced male of this sort again once said to me, 'Men are so much more affectionate than women.' Precisely the same words were used by one of my subjects. Also, the liaison springs up now and then quite accidentally through juxtaposition, when it is difficult to say whether either at the outset had an inverted tendency of any marked quality. In these cases the sexual relation seems to come on as a heightening of comradely affection, and is found to be pleasurable, sometimes, I think, discovered to be safe as well as satisfying. On the other hand, so far as I know, it is extremely rare to observe a permanent liaison between two pronounced inverts." The tendency to pseudo-sexual attraction in the homosexual would thus seem to involve a preference for normal persons. How far this is the case it seems difficult to state positively. Usually, one may say, an invert falls in love, exactly as in the case of a normal person, without any intellectual calculation as to the temperamental ability to return the affection which the object of his love may possess. Naturally, however, there cannot be any adequate return of the affection in the absence of an actual or latent homosexual disposition. On this point an American correspondent, H.C., with a wide knowledge of inversion in many lands, writes, One of your correspondents declares that inverts long for sexual relations with normal men rather than with one another. If this be true, I have never once found it exemplified in all my wide experience of inverts, and I have submitted his assertion to more than 50. These have been replied invariably that unless a man is himself homosexual, nearly all the pleasure of fellatio is absent. The fact is, the majority of inverts flock together not from exigency but from choice. The mere sexual act is, if anything, far less the sole object between inverts than it is between normal men and women. Why should the invert sigh for intercourse with normal men, where mutual confidences and sympathies and love would be out of the question? Personally, I decline to commit fellatio with a man who is given to women. The thought of it is repugnant to me. And this is the attitude with every invert I have questioned. The nearest approach to confirmation of your correspondent's theory has been when an extremely feminine invert here and there has admitted the wish that a certain normal man were inverted. Indeed, the temperamental gamut of inversion is itself broad enough to embrace the most widely divergent ideals. As my furthest reaching demands attain fruition in the gentle and pretty boy, so his own robuster affinity resides in me. If inverts were actually women, then indeed the normal male would be their ideal. But inverts are not women. Inverts are males capable of passionate friendship, and their ideal is the male who will give them passionate friendship in return. In at least 24, probably many more, of my male cases, there is a marked contrast, and in still a larger number a less marked contrast, between the subject and the individuals he is attracted to. Either he is of somewhat feminine and sensitive nature, and admires more simple and virile natures, or he is fairly vigorous and admires boys who are often of a lower social class. Inverted women are also attracted to more clinging feminine persons. A sexual attraction for boys is no doubt, as Moll points out, that form of inversion which comes nearest to normal sexuality, for the subject of it usually approaches nearer to the average man in physical and mental disposition. The reason of this is obvious. Boys resemble women, and therefore it requires a less profound organic twist to become sexually attracted to them. Anyone who has watched private theatricals in boys' schools will have observed how easy it is for boys to personate women successfully. And it is well known that until the middle of the 17th century women's parts on stage were always taken by boys, whether or not with injury to their own or other people's morals. It is also worthy of note that in Greece, where homosexuality flourished so extensively, and apparently with so little accompaniment of neurotic degeneration, it was often held that only boys under 18 should be loved, so that the love of boys emerged into love of women. About 18 of my cases are most strongly attracted to youths, preferably about the age of 18 to 20, and they are, for the most part, among the more normal and healthy of the cases. A preference for older men, or else a considerable degree of indifference to age alone, is more common, and perhaps indicates a deeper degree of perversion. Putting aside the age of the object desired, it must be said that there is a distinctly general, though not universal, tendency for sexual inverts to approach the feminine type, either in psychic disposition or physical constitution, or both. I cannot say how far this is explained by the irritable nervous system and delicate health, which are so often associated with inversion, though this is certainly an important factor. Although the invert himself may stoutly affirm his masculinity, and although this femininity may not be very obvious, its wide prevalence may be asserted with considerable assurance, and by no means only among the small minority of inverts who take an exclusive passive role, though in these it is usually most marked. In this I am confirmed by Q, who writes, "In all or certainly most cases, the cases of congenital male inverts, excluding psychosexual hermaphrodites, that I know, there has been a remarkable sensitiveness and delicate sentiment, sympathy, and an intuitive habit of mind, such as we generally associate with the feminine sex, even though the body might be quite masculine in its form and habit." When, however, a distinguished invert said to Moll, "We are all women, that we do not deny," he put the matter into extreme form. The feminine traits of the homosexual are not usually of a capricious nature. "I believe that inverts of plainly feminine nature are rare exceptions," wrote Nicky, and that statement may be accepted even by those who emphasize the prevalence of feminine traits among inverts. In inverted women some degree of masculinity or boyishness is equally prevalent, and it is not usually found in the women to whom they are attracted. Even in inversion the need for a certain sexual opposition, the longing for something which the lover himself does not possess, still prevails. It expresses itself sometimes in an attraction between persons of different race and color. I am told that in American prisons for women lesbian relationships are especially frequent between white and black women. A similar affinity is found among the Arabs, says Coker, and if an Arab woman has a lesbian friend, the latter is usually European. In Cochin China, too, according to Lorian, while the Chinese are chiefly pederasts, the Annamites are chiefly passive. It must, however, be remembered that in normal love, homogamy, the attraction of the like, prevails over heterogamy, and the attraction of the unlike, which is chiefly confined to those features which belong to the sphere of the secondary sexual characters. The same appears to be true in inversion, and the homosexual are probably on the whole more attracted by the traits which they seem to themselves to possess than by those which are foreign to themselves. End of chapter 5, part 2. Chapter 5 of Studies in the Psychology of Sex, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Studies in the Psychology of Sex, Volume 2, by Havelock Ellis. Chapter 5, The Nature of Sexual Inversion, Part 3. Physical Abnormalities. The circumstances under which many of my cases were investigated often made information under this head difficult to obtain or to verify. In at least 4 cases the penis is very large, while in at least 3 it is small and undeveloped, with small and flabby testes. It seems probable that variations in these 2 directions are both common, but it is doubtful whether they possess as much significance as the tendency to infantilism for the sexual organs in inverted women seems to possess. Hirschfeld considers that the genital organs of inverts resemble those of normal people. He finds, however, that phimosis is rather common. More significant, perhaps, than specifically genital peculiarities are the deviations found in the general conformation of the body. In at least 2 cases there are well-developed breasts, in one of the breasts swelling and becoming red. In one case there are menstrual phenomena, physical and psychic, recurring every 4 weeks. In several cases the hips are broad and the arms rounded, while some are skillful in throwing a ball. One was born with a double squint. At least 2 were 7 months children. In the previous chapter I have referred to the tendency to hypertrichnosis, and occasionally oligotrichnosis among inverted women. Among the men it is the latter condition which seems more common, and in several cases the bodies are hairless, or with but scanty hair. A few are left-handed, though not perhaps an abnormal proportion. The sexual characters of the handwriting are in some cases clearly inverted, the men writing a feminine hand and the women a masculine hand. A high feminine voice is sometimes found. A marked characteristic of many inverts, though one is not easy of precise definition, is their youthful appearance, and frequently childlike faces, equally in both sexes. This has often been remarked and is pronounced among many of my subjects. The frequent inability of male inverts to whistle was first pointed out by Ulrich, and Hirschfeld has found it in 23%. Many of my cases confess to this inability, while some of the women inverts can whistle admirably. Although this inability of male inverts is only found among a minority, I am quite satisfied that it is well marked among a considerable minority. One of my correspondents, M.N., writes to me, "With regard to the general inability of inverts to whistle, I am not able to do so myself. Their fondness for green, my favorite color, their feminine calligraphy, skill at female occupations, etc., these all seem to me but indication of the one principle. To go still farther and include trivial things, few inverts even smoke in the same manner and with the same enjoyment as a man. They have seldom the male facility at games, cannot throw at a mark with precision, or even spit." Nearly all these peculiarities indicate a minor degree of nervous disturbance and lead to modification, as my correspondent points out, in a feminine direction. It is scarcely necessary to add that they by no means necessarily imply inversion. Shelley, for instance, was unable to whistle, though he never gave an indication of inversion, but he was a person of somewhat abnormal and feminine organization, and he illustrates the tendency of these apparently very insignificant functional anomalies to be correlated with other and more important psychic anomalies. The greater part of these various anatomical peculiarities and functional anomalies point, more or less clearly, to the prevalence among inverts of a tendency to infantilism, combined with feminism in men and masculinism in women. This tendency is denied by Hirschfeld, but it is often well indicated among the subjects whose history I have been able to present, and is indeed suggested by Hirschfeld's own elaborate results, so that it can scarcely be passed over. I regard it as highly significant, and it is in harmony with all that we are learning to know regarding the important part played by the internal secretions, alike in inversion and the general bodily modifications in an infantile, feminine, and masculine direction. If we are justified in believing that there is a tendency for inverted persons to be somewhat arrested in development, approaching the child type, we may connect this fact with the sexual precocity sometimes marked in inverts, for precocity is commonly accompanied by rapid arrest of development. A correspondent who is himself inverted furnishes the following notes of cases he is well acquainted with. I quote them here as they illustrate the anomalies commonly found. 1. A male, eldest child of a typically neurotic family. 3 children in all, 2 male and 1 female. The other 2 are somewhat eccentric, unsocial, and sexually frigid, one in a marked degree. The curious point about this case is that A, the only one of the family possessed of mental ability and social qualifications, should be inverted. Parents' marriage was very ill assorted and inharmonious, the father being of great stature and the mother abnormally small and of highly nervous temperament, both of feeble health. Ancestry unfortunate, especially on the mother's side. 2. B. Male, invert. Younger of 2 sons, no other children. Has extremely feminine disposition and appearance, of considerable personal attraction, and has great musical talent. Penis is very small and marked breast development. 3. C. Male, invert. Younger of 2 sons, no other children. Interval of 6 years between first and second son. Parents' marriage one of great affection, but degenerate ancestry on mother's side, cancer and scrofula in family. 4. D. Male, invert, second child of 6, remainder girls. Of humble social position. Considerable depravity evinced by all the members of this family, with the exception of D, who alone proved steady, honest, and industrious. 5. E. Male, invert, second son of family of 3, the youngest child being a girl, stillborn, of extreme neurotic temperament, fostered by upbringing, effeminate in build and disposition, musically gifted. 6. F. Male, invert, second child of family of 5, eldest child a girl, died in youth. After F, a boy G, a girl H, and another girl stillborn. Parents badly matched, mother of considerable mental and physical strength, father last representative of moribund stock, the result of intermarriage. Children all resembling father in appearance and mother in disposition. drink tendency in both boys, to which F's death at the age of 30 was mainly due. G committed suicide some years later. The girl H, married into a family with worse ancestry than her own, has 2 children. 7. I and J, boy and girl, both inverted as far as I am able to judge. The boy was born with some deformity of the feet and ankles, is of effeminate taste and appearance. Boy resembles mother, and girl, who is of great physical development, resembles father. The same correspondent adds, I have noticed little abnormal with regard to the genital formation of inverts. These are, however, frequent abnormalities of proportion in their figures, the hands and feet being noticeably smaller and more shapely, the waist more marked, the body softer and less muscular. Almost invariably there is either cranial malformation or the head approaches the feminine in type and shape. Artistic and other aptitudes. All avocations are represented among inverts. Among the subjects here dealt with are found, at one end of the scale, numerous manual workers, and at the other end an equal number, sometimes of aristocratic family, who exercise no profession at all. There are 12 physicians, 9 men of letters, at least 7 are engaged in commercial life, 6 are artists, architects, or composers, 4 are or have been actors. These figures cannot give any clue to the relative extent of inversion in various occupations, but they indicate that no class of occupation furnishes a safeguard against inversion. There are, however, certain avocations which inverts seem especially called. One of the chief of these is literature. The apparent predominance of physicians is easily explicable. The frequency with which literature is represented is probably more genuine. Here, indeed, inverts seem to find the highest degree of success and reputation. At least half a dozen of my subjects are successful men of letters, and I could easily add others by going outside the group of histories included in this study. They especially cultivate those regions of bellus litteris which lie on the borderland between prose and verse. Though they do not usually attain much eminence in poetry, they are often very accomplished writers of verse. They may be attracted to history, but rarely attempt tasks of great magnitude, involving much patient labor, though to this rule there are exceptions. Pure science seems to have relatively little attraction for the homosexual. An examination of my histories reveals the interesting fact that 45 of the subjects, or in proportion of 56%, possess artistic aptitudes of varying degree. Galton found, from the investigation of nearly 1,000 persons, that the average showing artistic tastes in England was only about 30%. It must also be said that my figures are probably below the truth, as no special point was made of investigating the matter, and also that in some cases the artistic ability is of high order. It is suggested that Adler's theory of Minderwertigkeit, according to which we react strenuously against our congenital organic defects and fortify them into virtues, may be applied to the invert's requirement of artistic abilities. G. Rosenstein, Die Theorien der Organminderwertigkeit und die Bisexualität, Jahrbuch für psychoanalytische Forschungen, Volume 2, 1910, page 398. This theory is in some cases of valuable application, but it seems doubtful to me whether it is very profitable in the present connection. The artistic aptitudes of inverts may be better regarded as part of their organic tendencies than as a reaction against those tendencies. In this connection I may quote the remarks of an American correspondent, himself a homosexual. Regarding the connection between inversion and artistic capacity, so far as I can see, the temperament of every invert seems to strive to find artistic expression, crudely or otherwise. Inverts, as a rule, seek the paths of life that lie in pleasant places. Their resistance to opposing obstacles is elastic. Their work is never strenuous, if they can help it, and their accomplishments hardly ever of practical use. This is all true of the born artist as well. Both inverts and artists are inordinately fond of praise. Both yearn for a life where admiration is the reward for little energy. In a word, they seem to be born tired, begotten by parents who were tired too. Hirschfeld, Die Homosexualität, page 66, gives a list of pictures and sculptures which especially appeal to the homosexual. Prominent among them are representations of St. Sebastian, Gainsborough's Blue Boy, Van Dyck's Youthful Men, the Hermes of Praxiteles, Michelangelo's Slave, Rodin's and Meunier's working men types. As regards music, my cases reveal the aptitude which has been marked by others as peculiarly common among inverts. It has been extravagantly said that all musicians are inverts. It is certain that various famous musicians, among the dead and the living, have been homosexual. Ingegnero speaks of a genito-musical synesthesia, analogous to color hearing in this connection. Calicia states, Archivo di Psichiatria, 1900, page 209, that 60% inverts are musicians. Hirschfeld, Die Homosexualität, page 500, regards this estimate as excessive, but he himself elsewhere states, page 175, that 98% of male inverts are greatly attracted to music, the women being decidedly less attracted. Oppenheim, in a paper summarized in the Neurologische Centralblatt for June 1, 1910, and the Alienist and Neurologist for November 1910, well remarks that the musical disposition is marked by a great emotional instability, and this instability is a disposition to nervousness. It is thus that neurasthenia is so common among musicians. The musician has not been rendered nervous by the music, but he owes his nervousness, as also it may be added his disposition to homosexuality, to the same disposition to which he owes his musical aptitude. Moreover, the musician is frequently one-sided in his gifts, and the possession of a single hypertrophied aptitude is itself closely related to the neurophatic and psychophatic diathesis. The tendency to dramatic aptitude, found among a large portion of my subjects who have never been professional actors, has attracted the attention of previous investigators in this field. Thus Moll refers to the frequency of artistic, and especially dramatic, talent among inverts, and remarks that the case is doubtful. After pointing out that the lie which they have to be perpetually living renders inverts always actors, he goes on to say, apart from this, it seems to me that the capacity and the inclination to conceive situations and to represent them in a masterly manner corresponds to an abnormal predisposition of the nervous system, just as does sexual inversion, so that both phenomena are due to the same source. I am in agreement with this statement. The congenitally inverted may, I believe, be looked upon as a class of individuals exhibiting nervous characters which, to some extent, approximate them to persons of artistic genius. The dramatic and artistic aptitudes of inverts are therefore partly due to the circumstances of the invert's life, which render him necessarily an actor, and in some few cases lead him into a love of deception comparable with that of a hysterical woman, and partly, it is probable, to a congenital nervous predisposition allied to the predisposition to dramatic aptitude. One of my correspondents has long been interested in the frequency of inversion among actors and actresses. He knew an inverted actor who told him he adopted the profession because it would enable him to indulge his proclivity. But on the whole, he regards this tendency as due to hitherto unconsidered imaginative flexibilities and curiosities in the individual. The actor, ex hypothesi, is one who works himself by sympathy, intellectual and emotional, into states of psychological being that are not his own. He learns to comprehend, nay, to live himself into, relations which were originally alien to his nature. The capacity for doing this, what makes a born actor, implies a faculty for extending his artistically acquired experience into life. In the process of his trade, therefore, he becomes at all points sensitive to human emotions, and sexuality being the most intellectual undetermined of the appetites after hunger, the actor might discover himself in a sort of sexual indifference, out of which a sexual aberration could easily arise. A man devoid of this imaginative flexibility could not be a successful actor. The man who possesses it would be exposed to divagations of the sexual instinct under aesthetical or merely wanton influences. Something of the same kind is applicable to musicians and artists, in whom sexual inversion prevails beyond the average. They are conditioned by their aesthetical faculty and encouraged by the circumstances of their life to feel and express the whole gamut of emotional experience. Thus they get an environment which, unless they are sharply otherwise differentiated, leads easily to experiments in passion. All this joins on to what you call the variational diathesis of men of genius. But I should seek the explanation of the phenomena less in the original sexual constitution than in the exercise of sympathetic, assimilative emotional qualities, powerfully stimulated and acted on by the conditions of the individual's life. The artist, the singer, the actor, the painter, are more exposed to the influences out of which sexual differentiation in an abnormal direction may arise. Some persons are certainly made abnormal by nature. Others, of this sympathetic artistic temperament, may become so through their sympathies plus their conditions of life. It is possible there may be some element of truth in this view, which my correspondent regarded as purely hypothetical. In this connection I may, perhaps, mention a moral quality which is very often associated with dramatic aptitude, and also with minor degrees of nervous degeneration, and that is vanity and the love of applause. While among a considerable section of inverts it is not more marked than among the non-inverted, if not indeed less marked, among another section it is found in an exaggerated degree. In at least one of my cases vanity and delight in admiration, both as regards personal qualities and artistic productions, reach an almost morbid extent, and the quotations from letters written by various others of my subjects show a curious complacency in the description of their personal physical characters, markedly absent in other cases. It is suggested by Alexander Schmid, on the basis of Adler's views, that this vanity, which sometimes in the inverted artist becomes an exalted pride, as of a guardian of sacred mysteries, may be regarded as an effort to secure a compensation for the consciousness of feminine defect. The extreme type of this preoccupation with personal beauty is represented by the history of himself sent by a young Italian of good family to Zola, in the hope, itself a sign of vanity, that the distinguished novelist would make it the subject of one of his works. The history is reproduced in the Archives d'Anthropologie Criminelle, 1894, and in La Homosexualité et les types homosexuels, 1910, by Dr. Laups, G. St. Paul. I quote the following passage. At the age of 18 I was, with few differences, what I am now at 23. I am rather below the medium height, 1.65 meters. Well proportioned, slender, but not lean. My torso is superb. A sculptor would find nothing against it, and would not find it very different from that of Antonius. My back is very arched, perhaps too much so, and my hips are very developed. My pelvis is broad, like a woman's. My knees slightly approximate. My feet are small. My hands superb. The fingers curved back with glistening nails, rosy and polished, cut squarely like those of ancient statues. My neck is long and round, the nape charmingly adorned with downy hairs. My head is charming, and at 18 was more so. The oval of it is perfect and strikes all by its infantine form. At 23 I am to be taken for 17 at most. My complexion is white and rosy, deepening at the faintest emotion. The forehead is not beautiful. It recedes slightly and is hollow at the temples, but fortunately it is half covered by long hair, of a dark blonde which curls naturally. The head is a perfect form, because of the curly hair, but on examination there is an enormous protuberance at the occiput. My eyes are oval, of a gray blue, with dark chestnut eyelashes and thick arched eyebrows. My eyes are very liquid, but with dark circles and blistered, and they are subject to slight temporary inflammation. My mouth is fairly large, with thick red lips, the lower pendant. They tell me I have the Austrian mouth. My teeth are dazzling, though 3 are decayed and stopped. Fortunately they cannot be seen. My ears are small and with vari-colored lobes. My chin is very fat, and at 18 it was smooth and velvety as a woman's. At present there is a slight beard, always shaved. 2 beauty spots, black and velvety, on my left cheek, contrast with my blue eyes. My nose is thin and straight, with delicate nostrils and a slight, almost insensible curve. My voice is gentle, and people always regret that I have not learned to sing. This description is noteworthy as a detailed portrait of a sexual invert of a certain type. The whole history is interesting and instructive. Certain peculiarities in taste as regards costume have rightly or wrongly been attributed to inverts, apart from the tendency of a certain group to adopt feminine habits, and may here be mentioned. Tardieu, many years ago, referred to the taste for keeping the neck uncovered. This peculiarity may occasionally be observed among inverts, especially the more artistic among them. The cause does not appear to be precisely vanity so much as that physical consciousness which is so curiously marked with inverts, and induces the more feminine among them to cultivate feminine grace of form, and the more masculine to emphasize the masculine athletic habit. It has also been remarked that inverts exhibit a preference for green garments. In Rome, Cinetti were for this reason called Galbanati. Chevalier remarks that some years ago a band of pederasts at Paris wore green cravats as a badge. This decided preference for green is well marked in several of my cases of both sexes, and in some at least the preference certainly arose spontaneously. Green, as Jastrow and others have shown, is very rarely the favorite color of adults of the Anglo-Saxon race, though some inquirers have found it to be more commonly a preferred color among children, especially girls, and it is more often preferred by women than by men. The favorite color among normal women, and indeed very often among normal men, though here not so often as blue, is red, and it is notable that of recent years there has been a fashion for a red tie to be adopted by inverts as their badge. This is especially marked among the fairies, as a fellerator is there termed, in New York. It is red, writes an American correspondent, himself inverted. That has become almost a synonym for sexual inversion, not only in the minds of inverts themselves, but in the popular mind. To wear a red necktie on the street is to invite remarks from newsboys and others, remarks that have the practices of inverts for their theme. A friend told me once that when a group of street boys caught sight of the red necktie he was wearing, they sucked their fingers in imitation of fellatio. Male prostitutes who walk the streets of Philadelphia and New York almost invariably wear red neckties. It is the badge of all their tribe. The rooms of many of my inverted friends have red as the prevailing color in decorations. Among my classmates at the medical school, few ever had the courage to wear a red tie. Those who did never repeated the experiment. Moral attitude of the invert. There is some interest in tracing the invert's own attitude toward his anomaly and his estimate of its morality. As my cases are not patients seeking to be cured of their perversion, this attitude cannot be taken for granted. I have noted the moral attitude in 57 cases. In 8 the subjects loathe themselves and have fought in vain against their perversion, which they often regard as a sin. 9 or 10 are doubtful, and have little to say in justification of their condition, which they regard as perhaps morbid, a moral disease. 1, while thinking it right to gratify his natural instincts, admits that they may be vices. The remainder, a large majority including all the women, are, on the other hand, emphatic in their assertion that their moral position is precisely the same as that of the normally constituted individual, on the lowest ground a matter of taste, and at least 2 state that homosexual relationship should be regarded as sacramental, a holy matrimony. 2 or 3 even regard inverted love as nobler than ordinary sexual love. Several add the proviso that there should be consent and understanding on both sides, and no attempt at seduction. The chief regret of 2 or 3 is the double life they are obliged to lead. When inverts have clearly faced and realized their own natures, it is not so much, it seems, their conscience that worries them, or even the fear of the police, as the attitude of the world. An American correspondent writes, It is the fear of public opinion that hangs above them like the sword of Damocles. This fear is the heritage of all of us. It is not the fear of conscience, and it is not engendered by a feeling of wrongdoing. Rather, it is a silent submission to prejudices that meet us on every side. The normal attitude of the sexual invert, and I have known hundreds, with regards to his particular passion, is not essentially different from that of the normal man with regard to his. It is noteworthy that even when the condition is regarded as morbid, and even when a life of chastity has, on this account, been deliberately chosen, it is very rare to find an invert expressing any wish to change his sexual ideals. The male invert cannot find, and has no desire to find, any sexual charm in a woman, for he finds all possible charms united in a man. And a woman invert writes, "I cannot conceive a sadder fate than to be a woman, an average woman reduced to the necessity of loving a man." It will be seen that my conclusions under this head are in striking contrast to those of Westphal, who believed that every invert regarded himself as morbid, and probably show a much higher proportion of self-approving inverts than any previous series. This is largely due to the fact that the cases were not obtained from the consulting room, and that they represent in some degree the intellectual aristocracy of inversion, including individuals who, often not without severe struggles, have found consolation in the example of the Greeks or elsewhere, and have succeeded in attaining a modus vivendi with the moral world, as they have come to conceive it. End of Chapter 5. Recording by Kirk Ziegler, Ogden, Utah. Voiceoversbykirk.com.